4 years after, or 3 years after, Nigerians are still being targeted. Young people are still being profiled on the basis of their appearance, on the basis of the car that they drive, on the basis of their hairstyle. These were the things, even on the basis of the sort of mobile phone that they carry, these were the things that young people complain. Some of the grievances that Nigerian youth had against the very monstrous and murderous Special Anti-Robbery Squad, SARS. Even though the federal government had disbanded SARS in quotes, and I said disbanded in quotes, because what seems to have happened is that it looks like there was a change of name. They basically just disbanded the name, and then SARS now transitioned into something else, or what used to be SARS basically transitioned into something else. So in terms of code of conduct for police officers, respect for the rule of law and human rights, and instilling of discipline in the force, nothing has changed. Indeed, it has gotten worse. The police is still being used to rig elections. The police is still highly partisan today, as we have seen recently. So EndSARS was not just about SARS. EndSARS was about addressing the ills, number one, in the police, and secondly, in the country. EndSARS was just the mantra of the mass movement of young people. But the issues that had activated that movement were beyond SARS as a unit of the police. So today, quite tragically, the lessons have not been learned. And what that entails is that the next EndSARS protest or movement is going to be stronger, more popular, and more daring than the one of 2020. That is what I anticipate is going to happen. History will repeat itself, and when it repeats itself, I'm not sure how that is going to end, because the Nigerian government seems to only respond to violence. When you want to engage peacefully, the government has criminalized peaceful expression of grievances by Nigerians. Citizens are no longer allowed to activate or ventilate their grievances. So we saw the clampdown on the protesters till date. Some of them are still being incarcerated. The panels that we set up have not, the recommendations have not been implemented. So how can we say that lessons have been learned? But guess what?
Yes, yeah.
The young people of Nigeria learned one lesson, that when they are organized, when they galvanize, they can actually hold power accountable.
Would you say that based on the, because when you set out to do something for the purpose of what you wanted to do, you imagine that whether or not you achieve your goal and your desire, would you say the goal of EndSARS protest in 2020 has been achieved? Was it a failure or a success?
No, I cannot describe the EndSARS protest as a failure. I think that would be dishonoring those patriotic youths of our country who laid down their lives for the collective interest of the country. I think it will also be a disservice to those who were arrested and incarcerated, those who were injured, those who were traumatized in the course of that protest, to say that it was a failure. To the extent that the message that young people, when they come together, they can chase the political miscreants who have ruined our country. They can give them a run for their money. They can make the seat of power uncomfortable for them. To that extent, that message resonated. I believe that movement, that protest was a success. However, the struggle to have a reform, a sign, a discipline, and a rule of law compliance and a human rights compliance police force, that struggle has not achieved its objective. So we have to look at it carefully. I cannot pass a judgment of failure on the EndSARS protest. because for whatever, no matter the side of argument one takes, I participated in that protest to some extent, and I know that I saw the power of young people. And for me, that is a success story of the EndSARS. So I don't want us to demonize the history of the EndSARS struggle. I don't want us to demonize that movement. The government ought to have seen that contrary to the expectation that revolution is not possible in Nigeria, EndSARS gave some of us a moment of reflection that it is actually possible to wake up one day and experience a revolution. Because it was a revolutionary reaction. It was not planned, it was not televised. Something triggered it, I think, in Asaba or so, where a gentleman was attacked, by the police on the highway, and then that snowballed into a nationwide movement and protest. So what the EndSARS has shown is that it is possible for Nigerians to hold their politicians accountable when they are united. Even though in the northern part of the country, the EndSARS movement was not very active. But that is understandable, because if you have been to the north, for those who have been to the northern part of our country, SARS was not really a problem. I mean, I've traveled to Kano, I've traveled to a few northern states. You don't find police mounting checkpoints at everywhere harassing people. It is mostly in the southern part of Nigeria, particularly in the southwest, in the southeast, and the south-south. So maybe that is the explanation for why our northern brothers and sisters were not very active. And of course, you must also know that the government tried to sow the seed of discord, the seed of tribalism, and they tried to make it an ethnic agitation by insinuating that those who were protesting were doing so because the then very incompetent president of Nigeria, who had the misfortune of misruling this country, Muhammadu Buhari, was a northerner. So they used that sentiment to dissuade a significant portion of our northern youth to stay away from the protest. But guess what? The recent protest, the End Bad Governance protest, was even more active in the north. So I believe that it is possible for a day to come when the forces of division, the voices of segregation, of religious bigotry will be silenced. And when that day comes, that will be the day, the unification of the oppressed people of our country. When that day comes, EndSARS will be a child's play. And I believe that day is close. Because if you look at the handwriting on the wall, you clearly see that the government is in a complete and total panic mode. The Tinubu regime has completely lost any sense of stability. They are now on overdrive. They are now easily triggered by people carrying placards, to the point that the very serious crime of treason has been trivialized. So people who carry placard are being charged for treason. Currently, people are standing trial at the Federal High Court for treasonable felony. And when you look at the charge, they claim they attempted to overthrow the government on WhatsApp. This is how ridiculous our government has become. So what that tells you is that they are afraid. They are very scared. And I think that fear is understandable, because things have gotten worse. Police has not stopped harassing Nigerians. No form of accountability. People are still being shot almost on a daily basis across the country. Extortion on the highways have only increased. So how do you expect that there will be no other EndSARS? I think another EndSARS is coming, and that day will not be announced. No notice will be given. Something will trigger it, and when that day comes, like it is said, no idea, no army, no force can stop an idea whose time has come. I believe that time will come eventually.
Let me ask you, there were 5 for 5, very popular. Those were the demands. And if I may quickly read out some of those 5 for 5 demands that the protesters were asking for, because at that point, there are those who say, can the protesters harmonize their demands and let there be a targeted approach in the manner in which they went forward? And one of which was, one of the 5 for 5 demands was immediate release of all arrested protesters, justice for all deceased victims of police brutality, and appropriate compensation for their families, setting up an independent body to oversee the investigation and prosecution of all reports of police misconduct within 10 days. The fourth one was in line with Police Act, psychological evaluation and retaining to be confirmed by an independent body of all disbanded SARS officers before they can be redeployed. Then increase police salary so that they are adequately compensated for protecting lives and property of citizens. If you look at those 5 for 5, 4 years down the line, would you say we've made any progress as a people, as a nation, for the government and even the police force?
The answer is no. The answer is no, if you look at it objectively. Let's start with even the basic ones. Yes, the government had empaneled judicial commissions in Abuja, in a couple of states, about 20-something states or thereabouts. These panels were set up to investigate cases of police brutality, except for Lagos and maybe 2 other states where certain amounts of money were paid as compensation to individuals whose cases were made out at the panel. The rest of the states, the reports of the panel, most of them were thrown into dustbin. They have neither been even made, they've not been made public, let alone implemented. So what that tells you is that our government has always been dishonest. There was no willingness, there was no commitment to fulfill even the demands that the government itself had pledged to fulfill. There were several officers, police officers, that the Judicial Commission of Inquiry had recommended should be prosecuted. No single officer, not one in the entire country, to my knowledge, has been put on trial on account of an indictment or being indicted by any of the judicial commissions set up in any of the states of the Federation or Abuja. As a matter of fact, I think in 2018, the Muhammadu Buhari regime had also directed the National Human Rights Commission to carry out a similar investigation. That report was also not implemented. So the government has always been dishonest. So Nigerians are not really the problem on this matter. Now, look at the welfare of police officers, which was one of the demands. I'm not sure if much has been achieved in that respect. And all you simply have to do is look at our policemen. They are still wearing colonial-like uniforms. Many of them are highly unmotivated. Police stations are still grossly underfunded. And even when some resources are made available, they are, I believe, to a large extent diverted. So today, if you go to a typical police station in Nigeria, you still have to pay for biro, have to pay for exercise book, you have to give them fuel their car, provide what they call mobilization for them to investigate cases. So now the police has become a private organization funded by Nigerians. The government claims they are budgeting money, but when you need police to investigate cases for you, you still have to be the one to provide the resources. That is not how a public institution is supposed to be run. Now, look at the reforms, other reforms that Nigerians demanded, right? What has the government done about it? What has the government done? The protesters that we demanded their release, how many have been released? And like I said, people are still being detained in Lagos here. People connected to the EndSARS, even though efforts have been made by the civil society and the human rights community to get them out, but some people are still being detained on account of that protest. So no matter how you look at it,
yeah,
the Nigerian state was dishonest. The government has always been dishonest on this matter. And that is why I am saying clearly that the next EndSARS that is going to happen, the name may not be EndSARS, but I believe that a day is coming in this country. And our politicians, like I keep saying, they're intentionally deaf and willingly blind. This so-called political class witnessed EndSARS. They have witnessed the end bad governance protests. No lessons have been learned. They have not understood what people are saying. They have willingly chosen not to read the handwriting on the wall. The carelessness, the recklessness, the looting, the injustice, the oppression, the mismanagement is still ongoing. Institutions are still working against the interests of the people. So a day is going to come, and I believe that day is not far away, when it will be obvious to them. They will be compelled to accept that Nigerians have had it enough. Because with EndSARS, one would have thought that those who claim to be leaders in our country will begin to do things differently, that the police will begin to act differently. But nothing has changed. It's still the same culture of lawlessness and impunity in our country. And I'm saying that is not how to govern. That is not how to behave in the 21st century. So those demands that they have ignored, a day will come that Nigerians will compel them to fulfill those demands. And I hope that, when that day comes, it will not be too late.
So you look at it, in Abuja, about 410 million naira was being asked to be paid in in Lagos, for about 410 million naira was being said to be paid in compensation. There are about 250, over 250 petitions that people brought. About 30-something of them were being forwarded to the federal government. In Abuja, payout of about 289 million was said to been asked to be paid as compensation. But if you hear the story of the compensation in Lagos and Abuja and in some other states, would you say those were some kind of benefit that came out of the panel of inquiries that were set up over the EndSARS protest?
Of course, like I said, the government deceptively, and I say deceptively, because the whole idea of setting up these commissions of inquiry, these panels across the country, was to ensure that those who are victims of police brutality, that their cases are attended to, and where recommendation is made for payment of compensation, the government had promised that they were going to pay those compensations. And I indicated that, save for Lagos, and I think few other states, majority of the rest of the country, the recommendations were ignored. So those figures that you have called, it is only Lagos that I'm aware, and I think Osun or Ogun, one other southwestern states, that I know that some attempts were made to compensate victims whose cases were found by the tribunal, by the panels, to be meritorious. In Abuja, I'm not aware that compensations were paid, because the Buhari regime told us they were going to send a supplementary budget to the National Assembly in order to pay compensation not only to the panel in Lagos, but throughout the country, because the argument was that police is a federal institution and the governor said they cannot be responsible for it, which is ridiculous to some extent. They were speaking law, whereas we know that state governors are diverting money monthly in the name of security votes. We know that governors are buying vehicles for the police. We know that governors are giving money to commissioners of police in states. So how can you say that citizens who are residents in your state that were killed or injured or wrongly detained, and the panel that you yourself set up said pay them compensation, you now want to be exculpated from it? That is why I'm telling you that the government, both at the national and subnational level, they haven't learned any lesson. I believe that someday, I hope that someday, those recommendations will be implemented, and those who are entitled to compensation will be paid.